Hi, welcome back to another episode of the Keto Naturopath. I'm Dr. Carl Goldkamp. You know, one of the biggest difficulties I have in terms of getting a concept across to people in terms of health is about fat. Most people have a pretty superficial understanding of nutrition. They just want, I sort of understand protein, they think. I sort of understand what carbohydrates are, and I sort of understand what fats are. It sounds remarkable that I say this, but this is true. Whether I'm talking about my siblings or whether I'm talking about a fairly educated audience, that's as far as they want to know. When you get into different kinds of fats, you'll have the smart guy or woman in the back of the room going, well, what about omega-3s? But if you actually open up the conversation about omega-3s versus omega-6s or even saturated fats, you've lost them all. It's just not a concept that people can really tether into day-to-day dietary strategy. They still don't get it. All right, I eat fish, it's higher in omega-3s. That's as far as I want to go. So I am going to dare to break that barrier down by getting into that topic specifically. And I want to start with labs first. Real people. This isn't a concept. These are real people that came in and we took their, what they call their omega panel or omega-3, 6, whatever it's, it's called different things in different labs, but your omega panels, we'll call it. And so it compares these various fats. It's not that complicated. And it is data that I find very, very, very important. And most people go, well, I don't know. Well, I don't know. And it's a big story because if we go back 100 or 200 years ago, our sources of fats were primarily the protein sources we ate. They were the fish, they were the meat, they were the poultry, you know, and the wild game and everything else. That's as far as fat was. And you can say, well, the butter, but that came from the animal. So other than that, that's it. So you really couldn't get yourself in trouble there. You couldn't get yourself in trouble that much. You could say, well, there's a lot of fats in the pastries that were being made then and the other things. True. But what has happened today, which is the big variable, it's really the elephant in the room, is processed foods. That's not the end of the concept, by the way. It's the oils used in the processed foods. And the processed foods primarily are refined carbohydrates, whether it's potato chips or something else. And these industrial oils, the canola oil, the soy, the corn oil, the cottonseed oil, the peanut oil, safflower oil, and that's just a short list. These are all the oils that are used because they're far, far, far cheaper than using animal sources. And so it goes. So primarily, this is why we have people today that are so extremely high in omega-6 versus omega-3. And it was never an issue before. Before, you could be a person who just thought rather superficially like, well, I'll eat my meat or my chicken or my game or my fish and I'm good. They didn't have to think about, oh, am I having the right amount of protein? Oh, am I having the right amount of fat? That was a highly contrived, nuanced conversation if they even knew those terms. So unfortunately, if you are, and the chances are 99.9% that you are a processed food consumer. And maybe you're changing that because you've heard enough about processed foods, but it's the oils in those processed foods and on all the other garbage. But I'm talking about those oils are all omega-6s. So consequently, people now have a default omega-6 oil, which makes up the envelope of the red blood cells, their neurons, and so on and so forth. So it sets the foundation for so many different disorders and conditions that are vague and need to be treated. It's a little bit this, it's a little bit that. So we've now infused the body with oils that become part of us. It's just not that we eat them and they get excreted out. No, they become part of us. They go where the fat should have gone and try to fit together as best as possible. And that result is a very high inflammatory condition for nearly anything. Usually it starts off neurological because fats go into neurons, but also fats are part of your fuel, as we've learned, mitochondria. So it causes all these other problems, neurological, mitochondrial dysfunction, or even death. So let's take a look at real people and this omega panel. So the omega panel is not too complicated. I'm going to walk you through this, and every lab tries to make it seem more sophisticated than it really is. It's not really that sophisticated. You're looking at two different kinds of polyunsaturated fats. And the polyunsaturated fats are omega-3s and omega-6s for the most part. There is a thing called omega-9s. They're kind of a minor player in all this, so we're not going to go into that. We're just going to be talking about omega-3s and omega-6s. And then we're going to get into the protein-sparing modified fats, and there's relevance there because people who do not pay attention to this quickly get into problems. They try a quick fix. I'll do the PSMF because I need to lose weight. And consequently, they get into something much more dangerous, perhaps towards epilepsy, perhaps towards MS, perhaps towards cognitive decline. That would be the big one, or vascular dementia. So these are things that need to be paid attention to. And it's unfortunate that we have to pay attention to it now. Before we didn't. So it's not getting more sophisticated. It's trying to walk around the big obstacle the processed foods has created in our life. So here we go. Upper left, we say omega-6 versus omega-3 ratio. Now, what's really interesting is the labs say in black here that, well, the normal ratio is, we'll call this 6, 5.76, 6 to 21, meaning it should be tilted towards the omega-6 5 times more than omega-3 or 21 times that. That's pathologic. If somebody was 21 times, or you'll see people that are near that, 21 times the ratio, they have that much more omega-6 than 3. They're very pro-inflammatory, and they probably already have pre-existing problems that are caused directly from this. Is it canola oil? Is it safflower oil? Is it peanut oil? Is it cottonseed oil? Is it soy oil? Or is it corn oil? Does it matter? It all goes down the same hopper, which is our throat, and it all causes the same problems of omega-6. And when you look at soy and corn, which together make up 80% of the pesticide use in this country, you now have a tail, an accompaniment of various pesticides. And that is not superficial, and that's not insignificant. So we need to pay attention to that. Okay, so we have that ratio across the top. That's the number they consider normal. Here's the number I consider normal, a 1-to-1 versus a 3-to-1. So the most I look at in terms of being healthy is a 3-to-1 ratio of omega-6 to omega-3, omega-6 to omega-3. So it can be the higher one as the normal. The closer you get it back down to a 1-to-1, that's great. Don't think you can do more omega-3 than 6. If you do that, you are going to have a bleeding disorder. There's the other aspect. You're going to have a bleeding disorder. And one of the things I forgot to mention is that the omega-6 being the higher component, if you are 21-to-1, omega-6 to 3, you are going to have a clotting disorder, meaning you are going to be so pro throwing a clot. Who knows where you're going to get a thrombosis someplace. You know, you're now a high candidate for phlebitis, for vascular clots, for cardiovascular clots, so heart attacks, strokes, and pulmonary thrombosis as well. So that's the issue when people try to force it too much the other way. They kind of don't know, can't stop bleeding. So that might even be the biggest concern here. So let's look across the top just at a number of people. This is random by ages and gender. So we have 6 to a high of 17.2, a 17.8. So this means they have a lot of omega-6. Or what about omega-3s, which are the EPA and DHA, the two essential fats? So omega-3s are essential. The omega-6s and 9s are not essential. Isn't that interesting? So here we are. So their ratios on the top are so tilted to omega-6. And let me just stop there for a second and compare it to the line way up here, which is called HS-CRP. HS is high sensitivity C-reactive protein. So what we're comparing for those who have a high level of omega-6 fatty acids, and we're going to consider that primarily from processed foods, have also a high level of inflammation. Let's see if that's true. Take the 2 or 3 to the highest, 17.2. They have a 4.4 in the CRP. What about the 17.8? Well, I have a 3.9. Considering you're supposed to be under 1, better 0 for a CRP, that holds true. Now let's look for the people that have the lowest omega-6. The lowest omega-6 correlates with, let's see, lowest omega-6 correlates with lower. Here's one person who actually have fairly high omega-3 and a fairly low CRP. So now we look at omega-3s. Who has the highest omega-3? Here we go. Let's come in. A few more people came in, so to say. Right here we have what I want to show you. Here's the woman. It happens to be a woman with the lowest omega-6. And it was low by normal lab. They're saying, well, wait a minute, you're too low. You're below the 5.7, but you're still above Carl's ideal ratio. And so consequently, her inflammation is 0. How much EPA omega-3 does she have? She has 5.6, which is by the reference range, higher than is required. It's fine for me. So here you go. The inflammation is extinguished. Call that the fire extinguisher. So now let's look for people who have the lowest omega-3s. Over here, lowest omega-3, highest inflammation. Fairly low, fairly high. So you get the point. So the omega-6 to omega-3 ratio of you right now, and therefore of the food that you ate right yesterday, this morning, the day before, last week, made up this ratio. So if you continue eating the way you're eating with that ratio, you will continue to have inflammation. What does that mean? That means joint pain, probably means you can't sleep very well. It might mean maybe you have already thrown clots and already had a various thrombus from lung, heart, brain, legs. You probably even have a neurologic condition as well. It could be tingling in your hands. It could be, who knows, a lot of different ways. So that's my point that I'm going after. I can go a little further with this lab. Arachidonic acid is the omega-6 that is naturally coming in all sources of meat. So not to have omega-6 is not the answer. We just want to decrease that, and we want it to be a natural kind of omega-6 that comes in real life, which is primarily through animals. It's completely through animals. That's arachidonic acid, big word, I understand. So this is a 6:3 ratio as well. It's a different ratio, and it's not given by all labs, as you can see. And then it breaks down to the individuals. I'm not that interested in that. We're just going to go on these ratios. So now you got the ratio down. You understand omega-6, omega-3. You really need to bring up your omega-3s. 99.9% of you need to bring it up. And you need to be aware of this. This needs to be a lab that you go in once a year and you take care of. So this is going to drive your understanding of food choices in the future, I hope. And this is the same thing that I hope and I project on the people that we work with, both in clients and our Facebook group and our various programs. They need to understand this. They can't just go fats, protein, and carbohydrates. Okay, I got it. It's got to be a little bit deeper. Okay, so now we're looking at Chronometer. It's an app that's free on the web, and there's other tracking apps. I'm just more familiar with this, and this is fine. You can do it on MyFitnessPal and all these other things. So here's what I did. I know my ideal body weight is about 160, and so that's 1 gram per pound of protein that I need. So I need about 160 grams of protein per day. That's my goal. All right, so I then asked the question, well, how much of various different whole food sources of protein do I need to equal 160 grams, right? How much do I have to eat? We've already gone through the cooking thing and everything else. How much do I have to eat, and how much fat is in that amount of beef or pork or fish? And then of that amount of fat, what is the ratio between omega-3 and omega-6? It's been alleged that, oh, you got to eat fish, it's higher in omega-3. And you don't eat meat because, well, that's higher in omega-6. And it is interesting, about 20 years ago when I graduated from med school, it was all about, and there was kind of an agenda in our education looking back. It was like, well, you don't want to eat meats because you're going to get so much omega-6, you're going to be pro-inflammatory. You could argue that to be a shred of truth, by the way, so it's not completely wrong. But where the omega-6s were coming from was for the processed foods and all the oils out there. So all those bogus plant foods that are derivatives, refined carbohydrates, are the things that are driving the inflammation through the oils that they use, which are 100% omega-6. 100% omega-6. So now you have this big walloping addition to your diet, fat diet. It comes through processed foods of omega-6. Okay, so let's look and see if that's true just on whole food sources, real life sources. Something was living, is no longer living, that you're now going to eat. How do you feel about that rephrasing? Okay, so what I did is that I said, all right, how much? I used my goal is 100. This green bar is protein, so I needed 160. It just worked out, with plus or minus 5 grams is what I'm shooting for here, without spending too much time on this. So I said, okay, what about beef liver? Beef liver is not something I would have on protein sparing modified fast, but I did it as a comparison. And you can see if I needed 164 grams of protein, I would have to eat 20 ounces of liver. Now, there's a thought. I don't think I could eat 20 ounces of liver at one sitting. It would have to be more of a pate or a liverwurst. But you get my point. And that's 1,000 grams. And that's still about 600 to 800 grams less than I need. So it would be a hypocaloric um, diet. And so how much fat is that? So that's about 30 grams of fat that came along with that liver. Also, I chose, let's look at hamburger, ground beef, lean. People go, all right, so I'll have some lean hamburger. And if they were like me, and so if your ideal body weight is 120, then you just use a fraction of this. 120 over 60 is X, and you just figure out, because we're going to go to a table. All right, so here's 160 grams of protein. How much hamburger do I have to eat? I have to eat 635 grams. It's 28 grams per ounce. So that's really about 369. It's about 10 ounces of hamburgers that I have to eat. Not too bad. That actually will equal my BMR. Interesting. So what I want to ask is, so what is the ratio of omega-6 to omega-3? Well, hamburger, as we know it, and you've made it lean, so you've taken away some of the fat, really doesn't have any omega-3. So it is 100% omega-6. So in that sense, it's a very high omega-6 ratio. Okay, so we have 30 grams of those. Where's the fat? No, the fat of the hamburger, it's 102 grams of fat in lean hamburger cooked, and it's high in omega-6. Let's go to, all right, ribeye with visibly fat eaten, right? So it's obviously not a PSMF sort of day. Somebody's eating the whole thing. What do they get? Again, they actually have a fairly high amount of omega-3. So it's about 50-50. It's a 2-to-1 ratio, more in omega-6 than omega-3. And you'd have to eat 21 ounces of ribeye to equal 160. That's what I'd have to eat to get my proteins in. And that would almost equal my BMR as well. But neither of those do I eat, by the way. So what about cod? Cod's a whole different thing. So how much cod do I have to eat to equal my 160 grams of protein per day? I have to eat about 25 ounces. And of those 25 ounces, the ratio of omega-3 to 6 is probably about 6-to-1 omega-3. So it's true, the fish have a lot more omega-3 than omega-6. And when you look at total amount of fat, it's almost nothing. So there's hardly any fat at all. So call it almost fat-free. So when you have cod cooked, obviously, it's fat-free, 6 grams. Of that, mostly it's omega-3 and some saturated fats. Let's continue. All right, top sirloin. Top sirloin I always thought was very lean. So I put top sirloin, boneless, lean only, fat not eaten. And so what do we get? How much do I have to eat of that for that one day? How much sirloin cooked would I have to eat? I'd have to eat 6 times about 21 ounces of sirloin. That's what that means. Odd unit there. And that would be a little more than half my BMR. The fat there would be 35 grams. And of the ratio, and again, it's about a 10-to-1 ratio of omega-6. So meats, generally, so far, are holding up to the idea that they're very high in omega-6. But this is a natural omega-6. That's arachidonic acid. It's not all these others. Okay, where else can we go? We have tenderloin. Tenderloin is generally thought to be pretty low fat, lean, exclusive, expensive. So what do we have? In order to equal 162 grams of protein, for me, how much tenderloin would I have to eat? 19 ounces. Okay, that's about 1,000 calories. Still, I'm in calorie deficit if that's what I want to do. And this is just eating the meat. And so our ratio is 1 to 0.6. Interesting. So it's still tilted, pretty much a 2-to-1 ratio. Let's go on to tuna. A lot of people choose tuna. Tuna generally is a low-fat fish, just like the cod was, and the ratio is about, it's pretty high omega-3, but it's almost a fat-free fish, which is why those who want to lose weight, they would eat tuna. The problem with tuna, all tuna has mercury. I spent a good part of a decade and a half treating people just were tuna eaters, and they had high mercury, and it was giving them a neurological issue. And so we'd have to chelate that out, and there's a big long protocol for that. But I am without a doubt certain if you focus on tuna, you will be absorbing mercury, which is the kind that gets very absorbed into your nerves and so on and so forth. So you don't want to do that. Do I say stay away from all tuna? For the most part, unless there's a real exception. It's just unfortunately too concentrated. So now let me go to a table which I put this together. So now you see where I get my information. We're looking for how fatty is that source, right? I did it on me, male 5'10", and everything else is just a portion of. So it would be the same for you, but if you're half my ideal body weight, then it's half that. But it's still going to be, what are the leanest choices in terms of low fat? What are the highest fat sources? And what are the highest omega-3s to omega-6 sources? Or you can do it the other way around. Let's take a look. All right, so here we're looking at a chart that puts this together, hopefully a little more comprehensively and coherently for you. So we're looking at all those things that I got off of Chronometer, and that's saying in this piece of whole food source of protein, fish, meat, and poultry, what are the leanest? What are the best in terms of omega-3 or omega-6, right? We're going to look at that ratio. And what is that calorically? So let's just start at the top. I did fish here at the top. So we have cod, which you saw me go through. So cod, let's jump over the end. Cod has very little fat. It's also consequently very few calories. So you get a real big bang to your protein to calorie ratio is a big deal. It's right up there with tuna. Tuna was the other one that is, all right, how many calories are in a course of a day? They're pretty much identical. One's 744, the other's 731 in terms of calories. For me, for that 160 grams of protein per day, I just need a little 750, we'll call it, for both of them. And it's just slightly more fat in tuna than it is in cod. Interesting. So of those, you should choose cod because the tuna has the mercury, as I said. All right, so what about other things such as that you can get a little more conveniently? Not everybody likes cod. What about sardines? Not everybody likes sardines either. So in sardines, first of all, I'd have to have 7 cans of sardines to get my protein that I needed. Well, how much fat is in that? Well, that's 61 grams of fat. So just on the fat side, if we're looking for protein-sparing modified fast in these lean days, that we're choosing lean things for these days, we're not choosing fat-free. Fat-free is not an option. We're choosing whole food sources of protein, okay? Whole food sources of protein. Has to be real life food. Okay, of that, it's clearly 10 times fattier than cod. So sardines are 10 times fattier than cod. You have to eat about 30 ounces. The cod, you needed to eat about 25, so they're more or less the same. But it's a good 250 to 300 calories more, if that makes a difference. It's still very far under my BMR, which is about 1700, not working out. So it's not interesting. Now we go on to tuna. We already looked at tuna before. Coho salmon, we hear salmon. This is wild salmon. Don't do farmed. For 1,000 reasons, don't do farmed. Salmon is thought to be, oh, it's a fatty fish. You know, it's a really fatty fish. Let's just look at the fat part. Well, we find that it's half as fatty as sardines. Salmon is half as fatty as sardines. Sardines are in these little cans, of course. Salmon is a whole big serving. So how much salmon would I have to eat to cover my protein needs for me male, 5'10", with 160 pounds of ideal body weight, I would need to eat 24 ounces, which is a big dinner. It's a lot. It's like, if we break it up over 4 servings, as we talked about before, that would work. But it's 945 calories. All right, so now let's check the omega-3 to omega-6 ratio. Omega-3 ratio, it's, wow, the ratio is 16 to 1, omega-3 to omega-6. 16 to 1. So the idea that fish have more omega-3s than 6 is just holding up. And so of that ratio, of the highest ratio, let's look at this. The highest ratio from salmon to tuna to sardines to mackerel, which is another canned thing, fish, to cod, salmon is way over the top in terms of omega-3. So it holds true. That's it. So it's not a super fatty fish. It's not as fatty as sardines, but it has a great ratio. What about meat? Where does meat fall in? Does meat fall into all meat is higher in omega-6 than omega-3? It's the natural form. Arachidonic acid, remember. I'm not saying that's less bad. It's just we have a need for omega-6s as well, okay? So you need to get them someplace. You might as well get them from animal sources, okay? As opposed to processed foods. So the ratio, let's start with lean. The leanest sources of meat that I've simply did top sirloin, tenderloin, ribeye, and lean ground hamburger. The leanest was the top sirloin, yeah, pretty much top sirloin, then the tenderloin, then the ribeye, without the fat, that is, and the lean hamburger. So in terms of omega-6 and omega-3, they were all of them were very high in omega-6 and omega-3. But what you saw here was, say, the worst would be, I guess you could say, ground hamburger. It actually has no omega-3. And the second worst would be the top sirloin. So we don't have to be perfect for everything we choose. To have, for the protein sparing modified fast, to have lean protein sources is the first step. Of those, once you start getting results, choose to have your higher omega-3s. Have some salmon there every so often. Throw in some fish. And if you don't want to do that, the other point was, why not have a fish oil supplement? So then you'll have to artificially, if you will, balance it on your own. So that's up to you. But you need to pay attention to this, because if you don't pay attention to this, apart from the whole processed food rant, you really need to have an appropriate balance. You'll function better, you'll have mental clarity better across the board. So what about poultry? Where does chicken come in? You'll be surprised at this one. So chicken, in terms of leanness, how much chicken would I have to eat to equal I would have to eat 19 ounces of chicken, and that's skinless chicken breast, okay? That'd be 930 calories. So if I just had that, and how much fat would come with that? I'd have 24 grams of fat, which is not terrible. It's certainly not as fatty as, it's less fatty than the salmon, and it's less fatty than the sardines, and it is less fatty than all of the meat. So it's less fat than all of the meats. Pretty much it's the leanest thing you could have outside of the cod and outside of the tuna. So that's pretty remarkable. But here's the thing with chicken. Chicken by itself is very tilted to omega-6. Very tilted to omega-6. And so you could argue here, is this grass-fed chickens that are out there pecking the grass all day, and you just have some seeds that are not soy or corn, and they eat that, that would probably change it a little bit, as opposed to the caged animals that are pretty high. That would probably be even a higher omega-6. So it varies depending on where your chickens had come from, for sure. But I think they'll all be tilted towards, the ratio is 9 to 1, 6 to 3. So it's pretty high. It's not as high as the top sirloin, a little bit worse. It's not as high as a hamburger. And so you just take that in stride, or you simply balance it with taking fish oil. So you need to know the ratio, and also here is picking leanness. Here's, If you're picking, all right, I want to lose weight, then you're picking a whole food source and taking a lean source because you need fat at the same time. Do not do this. Do not do protein powders or just egg whites and tuna, which is actually pretty common. That goes back decades. People do egg whites and tuna. Well, they would damage themselves very quickly. Once you start depriving your body of essential fats for sure, which are the omega-3s, are essential fats. We only need two essential fats in our whole body, EPA, DHA, which are omega-3s. So once you start depriving your body of all fats, let alone not getting the essential fats you need on a daily basis, you start to break down. Your nerves start to break down, your brain starts to break down, so you start suffering a lot of consequences. Your immune system, red blood cells no longer are going to be ensheathed in omega-3s, and you get clotting problems. Okay, I'm going to end there and saying, I hope this is a word to the wise, and you get that yes, you can choose your whole food sources of protein by leanness, but also consider the balance of omega-3 to 6s. By not knowing that, you can get yourself into trouble by being so extreme in either not choosing whole food sources of protein or choosing the wrong ones. If you're just going to be having chicken breasts all the time, period, chicken breasts all the time, you're going to be very high in omega-3, and you're going to have to do something to balance that. So till next time.